You're listening to the third season of the Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast with me, your host, Kim Cooper. Each episode, we will speak with leaders from across Canada with the purpose of bringing connection, engagement, and encouragement. We hope these episodes will challenge and equip you along your ministry journey. Welcome to Ministry Mind Podcast. We have Mr. Rod Barks, Reverend Rod Barks. You are a district rep for ACOP. I'm really excited to have you with me today, Rod.
Hey, it's good to be here. And please don't call me district director. Call me rector or something. I'm kidding. Rod's pretty good. I'm not really hung up on titles.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. We're going to have a great conversation today on leadership. You don't know anything about that, do you?
Oh, Lord. Some of it is strategic learning, and some of it is accidental learning, and some is learning just thrust on me through the adventures of life, right? So,
yeah. Well, that's ministry, isn't it?
No kidding.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Rod.
Well, my wife and I live in Stony Creek, Ontario, which is part of Hamilton. Although the old timers here say it's Stony Creek, it's not Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
Whatever. Sure.
Whatever.
Wink, wink. Cheryl and I have been married 12,697 days. I know.
Wow. You can count high.
Well, believe it or not, I actually am very strategic about the number of days we're married, because I think good marriages unfold day by day, not year by year. A year is too long for us. So, but putting it in years, we've been married almost 35 years.
Wow.
I know. How could it be, right? When I look so young.
I know. You don't even look 35.
Well, it gets better. We have seven kids. 4 by birth.
I was like,
and 3 by marriage.
There you go. Now it makes sense to me.
We have determined that our kids coming into the family just become our kids. So that's why I say 7 kids. And we have 3 grandkids. We love our grandbabies.
Oh.
Sophia and Reagan and Atlas. So
that's
what else would you like to know?
Well, tell us about tell us a little bit about how ministry started for you. Like, where did you start in leadership? Where did that begin?
Yeah, I would say that I have, when I kind of press the rewind button on my life, I have almost, like, as far back as I can remember, I've always emerged in leadership of some capacity, whether it's raising, being president of our kids club, when we were like 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah. Wow.
or involved in youth leadership, or somehow we went, both Cheryl and I went to Eston College, and but I would say that our emerging into some level of formal leadership probably began in my last year of Bible college. Back then it was still a 3-year program, and in the 3rd semester, Brian Cooper, you might know that name.
No.
I know. He was on staff at the time. And I remember Brian calling me in one day and just saying, hey, there's this place looking for an intern for the summer in Assiniboia, Saskatchewan, with a guy named Murray Wright. And Brian encouraged me to go.
Wow.
So honestly, Kim, I only went because I didn't have anything better to do for the summer. I know, it sounds so bad. But, so I went. That's what you did. Pardon me?
That's what you did. You went. You just go.
Yeah, I went.
Yes.
There we go. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Hung out with Murray for the summer, and by the end of the summer or so, I had applied for different things, but nothing had materialized yet. He asked if I would stay on for a year, just help out. I did. He announced in, I think, October that he was moving, had accepted another role. I know. So I'm like 21 years old, and he's going, and I think you could be the one to lead here. So
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I think a huge part of at least mine and Cheryl's leadership journey has been to keep saying yes.
Right. That is a recurring theme that I have been hearing in many, many of my podcast episodes.
Right. Right.
So
So
cool.
we said yes in an interim capacity initially.
Yeah.
And then I was invited formally to ask or to become senior pastor there.
Wow.
But I
And
had
you
already
at the
gotten
ripe old
older.
age of 22?
By then I was 22, so I was much more experienced and
Much more. Much.
ready to lead at that point. So that's kind of how I began. And
Yeah.
somebody called it out. I leaned in, God leaned in, and we just kept stepping it out. So
Yeah. I like what you said about how you like had that leadership emerging in when you look back at so many different areas of your life. Oftentimes we don't even realize that we're just naturally bent that way till we look back and go, oh, I was actually leading when I was, 7 or whatever.
right.
And then that saying yes, I love that. Actually, Brian Cooper's the reason that I took my first internship too. But
Really?
he had a bit of a pull. He had a little bit of a secret trick up his sleeve.
Tell me about it.
His name's Greg Cooper.
Yeah.
So I said
Yeah, that'll
yes.
do it.
I said yes. And that was the beginning of too many yeses. So
That's so
so
good.
um I wanted to ask you this question. Where or how do you think leadership starts for others? Do you think that's the answer? Do you think that it is completely you're a leader or you're not a leader, or everyone's a leader, or you can be taught leadership? Like, how does leadership start for others?
Kim, in my humble opinion, I think, and I'm assuming our conversation will go in this direction at some point, but I think everyone is called to leadership.
Right.
Bill Hybels, I know that that's a bit of a swear word in some circles today, but he boils in leadership down to influence.
Yep.
And so in psychology today, it's been heralded that even the most introverted of individuals will influence at least 10,000 people in their lifetime.
That's a big say. Like, wow, really?
I know, and put it on steroids, like somebody like yourself who has influence, position, podcast, and great humility about it all. There we go. Like how many more are being influenced as a result of what we do? It's crazy. So if that's true, well, and if that's true, then we all are in essence leaders, right?
Right.
And I think our leadership journey needs to start with acknowledging that we are people of influence, and embrace it, lean into it, and realize that God wants to use our influence for his glory and for his honor.
And steward it.
Yes.
That's good.
Steve Pike in his book, Next Wave, talks about that.
Reading it right now.
Isn't it a great book?
It is.
I love it.
Yeah.
But he talks about the essence of discipleship. I love what he says, and that I think it's his second chapter about that discipleship starts pre-conversion.
Yes.
And that as soon as you come into relationship with someone, you essentially begin to disciple them. What is that? Yep. That's leaning into our natural influence and leadership that God has given us.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. As soon as you started talking about that question, right away, I was thinking about, I read chapter 2 and 3 last night. And I was thinking, that's exactly it. Like, it's as soon as you're in relationship, you have influence and you're leading.
Right.
Good or bad.
Right. What I love about that premise is that it's not complicated.
No.
It's embracing who we are, the natural relationships that God sets us up with, and leaning into it.
I like that. That's a very good answer to that question. What is leadership? It's relationship and leaning into influence with those that you have relationship with. Good answer, Rod.
I like it.
That's good. So, okay, what's the difference between ministry gifts and leadership gifts? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I have. I don't know if there's complete clarity around that.
No.
But I did a quick search on how many Christian leaders have the gift of leadership. And so I say this with, like, it's not an extensive research, but Barna in 2009 said that 2% of believers say that they have the gift of leadership. Cousins, in her book, Letting Go of Leadership Heresies, and I think it's a her. My apologies, Cousins, if it's a him. Let's say author Cousins says 8% of pastors believe they have the gift of leadership. I know, which surprised me. And we're wandering a bit, I know, because you asked what's the difference between ministry gifts and leadership, ministry gifts and leadership qualities, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think some have the natural gift of leadership, but all are called to lead. It's kind of like evangelism. Some are evangelists. I know a guy named Tom who leads more people to Jesus before lunch than I do in a lifetime, you know? But I'm called to evangelism as well. Or I know somebody named Michaela who has a gift of mercy. But believe me, God expects that fruit to be growing in my life as well. So I think leadership is the same thing. We're all called to leadership, but some will naturally do it and excel at a higher level. And by higher level, I don't demean the one or two, but some will influence. It's like leadership capacity, right? Yeah. And the one with the leadership gifting is going to have a higher level of capacity in terms of influencing people. What do you think of that definition?
I like it. I agree with you. I think sometimes we discount our leadership and we're not aware of our ministry gifts. And I do think that they're somewhat fluid depending on the mix, how much, but I do think it's a lot on our perspective or our misinterpretations of things or misunderstandings or the way that people can discount themselves. Because I know someone that is in leadership in a church on a board that was asked a question if they would lead a small group. Oh, well, I'm not a leader.
Right.
And so there is some misconceptions about leadership. So I really like where we're going with this because everyone's called to lead and everyone's called to evangelism. But we all have some different leanings or different ways of doing it or different strengths in different areas. But yeah, I was shocked when I had heard that. And I wonder how many people, so I liked those statistics you shared because I think they're correct. We count ourselves more than we need to. And if we really think leadership is influence, then we all should be leading or could be leading.
Right. So Kim, you were not surprised when I said 2%. Well, no, let's go to the Cousins theory that 8% of pastors believe they have the gift of leadership.
That one I was surprised by.
Okay.
That one I was surprised by because I think if you're in pastoral ministry, you've clearly, there's been some level of you hearing a call and you having someone validate that call or call it out or say, I see in you or give you a level of authority. So that would just automatically then communicate to me that there is leadership in the pastor and that others see it. So that one did surprise me. It was the other one that didn't. How about you?
Yeah.
Did it
Yeah,
surprise?
it surprised that Cousins percentage did surprise me as well.
Yeah.
I think that most I prefer the term primary leader versus senior pastor, because I
Yeah.
think it's mixing up terminology. But
Yeah.
most primary leaders, it's kind of like communication. Barna says that 80% of primary leaders believe they are in the top 10% of communicators.
I just
Which
saw that statistic.
did you like?
I
Isn't that great?
did. I just saw that. Yeah.
Which I think I'm there. No,
Right.
we, we, yeah, we're our level of self-awareness is not always super keen. So
Right.
yeah, I was surprised at Cousin's stats as well.
Yeah.
But whatever the case, I do believe that our traditional, and by traditional I mean the church kind of pre-COVID
Right.
traditional modern in North or model in North America. We have looked especially for someone to lead the church with the gift of leadership, but really if only 2% do have that, well, we've got a bit of a problem, and it should probably lead to a pastoral shortage. Go and figure,
Yeah.
because right, and
Yeah.
we're certainly seeing that stuff emerge. I think
Yeah.
the solution is to recognize that everyone is called to leadership. So the kicker is not necessarily to find the 2 to 5% or whatever who have the gift of leadership. The kicker is to how do we release the 95% that are also
Right.
called to lead, right?
Yes.
So
That's really good. Yeah, exactly. I think where we saw that statistic was that Eston College has Eston College online, their eco course on communication. I think that's where we
right,
probably saw that statistic coming out. So that's a little plug for the college eco. You could go to
yeah,
the communications class. That's good.
yeah, no kidding.
Um, so so then you say, okay, the kicker is how do we get the 95% to not only see themselves as leaders, but can leadership be taught?
Well, yes, as long as we define it properly, right? As soon
Right.
as if it's only the 95 or only the 5% that we put into leadership and say they have the leadership gifting and we just need to release them. Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's one paradigm, it's one philosophy.
Right.
It's one that I disagree with. If we embrace the fact that 100% of people are called to leadership at some level, then we can, the next question is how do we release it, right? How do we empower them and release it? And I think that it has to start in, like, even in what you and I have experienced,
Right.
um, somebody seeing it.
Yep.
In my case, I identified Brian, and
Yep.
I think we do need to make heroes of people like that. Thank
Yep.
you, Brian, if you're listening.
I'll make sure he listens.
Woot woot. Like it, Brian sees it, calls it out.
Yeah.
I leaned in.
Yeah.
Murray right then works alongside of me and helps to craft it. And I become a humble learner,
Yeah.
asking questions and trying my hand and giving room to fail. And he's got his arm around me and going, hey, you can do better. Here's what you could do. But that was
Right.
great, you know?
Yeah.
The affirmation. And at some point, and I lean into that, I don't give up.
Right.
And then at some point, Murray says, hey, and I believe that you could do this. And so
Right.
in me stepping out as a 21-year-old, it was actually walking upon his confidence, not a
Not your
21-year-old's
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah.
And both people were involved, right? I think that
Yeah.
sometimes in leadership development, we have a younger generation saying nobody cares, when in fact they need to lean in. But we
Right.
have a developed or an experienced generation saying there's nobody there, when in fact they just need to speak it out. They need to see it and then speak it out and walk alongside of someone.
Gold.
Both are
Absolutely.
involved, right?
Both are involved. And if they're not, then it doesn't happen because it takes both
Right.
parties. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yes. And I love what you guys have done with Peak to Peak out in your area, in your district, with that leadership development for emerging leaders.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. It started with a conversation in a living room. Don't most great things start with a conversation, right?
Yes. Yes.
Among concerned people. In our case,
Right.
it was with Peter and Helene Barber, who are part of the lead team in Ontario.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that we've got some major shifts coming up in our churches in terms of primary leadership in the
Right.
next 8 years. And the understanding that we can either sit on our duffs and hope that it turns out, or we can be proactive in developing leaders.
Right.
And the next question is, where do we find leaders? Well, seems like the biblical response, like Paul talked about raising up those who are among you.
Right.
When we start from the premise that everyone leads, then we can look for the people in our congregations who show leadership sparkle. Because
Yeah.
I think, right, that we
Yeah.
can watch for the sparkle and we can embrace those individuals, especially, and say, I see this in you.
Yeah.
Here's what I suggest. So we just sent that a letter of invitation out to our pastors, said we'll partner with you. We have nothing in this other than seeing your church thrive.
Right.
It's going to thrive as you develop people. And
Yes.
Kim, between you and I and whoever listens to this,
Yeah.
we find that lots of our primary leaders, the desire is there to develop leaders, but they honestly don't know how to.
Right. Or
It's
have
like
the
this,
time or capacity to do it on their own, right?
right? Well, probably the 5% with the leadership gifting are.
Yeah.
But that also means that we have a lot of our primary leaders who don't have the gifting. So
Right.
how do we partner with them? So it was a basic premise. Send us your people, we'll develop them. We will take them from whatever peak of leadership they are at to the next peak of leadership.
Awesome.
It's not about crossing a finish line so much as progress. We can help them progress in their leadership journey. So
cool.
it's been
That's
successful. It's just fun. So,
yeah. Well, it looks like you guys are having fun.
yeah. And we actually just launched that in Manitoba as well this past weekend with 40 people from 5 churches. So pretty excited about that. Yeah.
That's really good. Okay. So shifting a little bit, what do you think the difference between leading and managing?
I think, Kim, that let's start with managing. Honestly, I work with a lot of church managers. Managers is taking care of what is. And I think leadership is about leading into what can be.
Oh, wow.
Managers are pretty good about managing what is the present state. The problem is the world continues to change, right? And if we only manage what is, we will eventually write an obituary for our church.
Wow.
But if we raise up leaders see what can be. And they are the ones that are going, God, what do you want? How do we do it creatively? Who do we work with? Who do we partner with? Who has God put us in connection with and relationship with? And they're optimists. They believe that there's a bright future that just needs to be led into.
Right. Wow.
What do you think of that?
Well, I love what you just said. Managing is leading what is.
Right.
Leading is leading into what could be, and then taking into consideration how much our world is changing, our culture is changing, the way that we communicate, the various ways that we can communicate with people. It's all changing all the time. So how are we going to be successful if we continue to manage, not truly lead?
Right. Right. Especially in a post-Christian Canada, right?
Yes.
The tools that worked in the past don't work in the present. And if we only manage, we won't impact our world for Jesus. We just won't.
No. So then that leads right into my next question, because you alluded to, and I would agree that probably more of us than would like to admit to it are managing our churches, not leading our churches. So can a leader change their style of leadership? Can there be a shift? If so, what do we do? How do we do that? How do we change from managing to leading? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that, again, for the 5% or so who have a leadership gifting, they're already doing that.
Yeah.
Right? They see.
Yeah.
For the 95%, and again, I'm careful saying that I'm just pulling those numbers out of the air, but I think they're probably pretty close. It's not that the 95% don't have desires.
Right.
It's just they don't know how to get there.
Right.
And so what we can do, what is necessary is for an apostolic voice to come alongside and help nurture that stuff out. In many ways, it's mining the precious spiritual metals out of the life and the leader that is existing there. Sometimes they just can't dig that stuff out themselves, and it's not about quality of person or anything. It's about gifting.
Right.
Sometimes we've encouraged leadership teams. In fact, Cheryl and I were just working with 2 of them this past weekend, that what's really needed in order to press into God's bright future and kingdom impact is it's not a lack of desire. No. Everybody wants that. But we need to set up at least a couple of days where an apostolic voice can just kind of help figure out what are the dreams on your heart, and then a basic pathway in moving forward. I think some of those things sometimes get lost in mission and vision of a church.
Right.
And I'm not against mission and vision, but they're usually so broad that what we need are some very specific goals. Like some leaders just need to know over the next 6 months, we're going to work really hard at this or that or whatever.
Right.
But realistically, it's hard for them to get there on their own. And that's the beauty of this thing called the fivefold ministry gift. That's one of the roles of the apostle. They call that stuff out.
Yeah.
They exist to empower and to make champions of the leaders that are under their influence. And if their goal is to do anything less, then they're not moving in their gifting.
Right.
So
yeah, I like that, because I know that you're right. I don't think that very often people choose to step into or walk in leadership or into ministry without having a great desire to do it well.
Right.
But often we let our pride get in the way, or we don't ask for help.
Right.
We feel like, oh, because I've been given this authority, I should be able to figure this out on my own.
Right.
And so what I hear you saying is that we need to reach out to those that do have that natural gift, or someone that's even really good at helping you mine out that what could be, right?
Right.
I mean, even for us, I'm just thinking about in our current situation, pastoring the church here at Eston Full Gospel and moving into a season of a lot of unknowns and a lot of change. Last weekend, we asked Jordan Gadsby to come and help us do force field. Okay,
right.
What's helping us? What's hindering us in moving into this next season? And then how do we create some measurable goals and things that we can do to move forward? Now, most people would say, Greg and Kim Cooper, they have leadership skills. They have leadership gifts. They'll be fine. But we needed help. Our board needed help to walk through some of that stuff. Obviously, it's still going to be tough, but we needed to have someone come, an apostolic voice, come and help us sift or mine through how do we get to that next phase, and how do we not just manage where we're at, but how do we lead forward into what God has for us next?
Well, and Kim, I actually, like you mentioned, you and Greg needed that. I actually wonder if we ever truly outgrow that.
I don't think so.
I was chatting with a friend of mine named Tom Braun a couple of weeks ago. Easter Sunday, they presented the gospel to 1,000, no, Easter Saturday, 1,000 children and 500 parents, he said.
Wow.
They've just seen this explosive kingdom growth. It's crazy. But when I get talking to Tom, he begins to list his coach, or coaches. He's got 4 or 5 that he just taps into, because he says, I'm just trying to feel my way along. And I just go, man, I don't know, if it looks like you're doing a pretty good job, but he's learned the value of receiving outside input, right?
Yeah.
Christian Schwartz, that may not be a familiar name to many anymore, but he did a study he's a German theologian, I think it was in the late 90s, involving, I believe, 10,000 churches around the world. And he looked at the signs of health, the common signs of health between all of them. And one of them, if I remember correctly, was healthy churches, they ask for help receive input from an outside source. So very interesting stuff.
Right. And
kudos to you guys.
Oh, thanks. And thanks to Jordan for giving his time to us and coming and spending that weekend.
Yeah.
And to our board for being open to that. That was really good. Funny, Christian Schwartz was my grandpa, but not that Christian Schwartz. But yeah, you're right. We need to be open to asking for help. And I like that you're saying, no, it's not just because we're new leaders. Leaders need to have that voice, those coaches in their corner. I think we're all better when we have a team of people helping us to see our blind spots, to see the ways that we can move forward and grow or be challenged. And oftentimes, like you had made mention before, something about awareness and lack of self-awareness. And I think one of the greatest leadership qualities is self-awareness.
Right.
At Epic, we read a book called The Gift of Being Yourself. And that's a great little book, not long read, but it's a good one. And it helps you to become more aware of yourself. But I think it also talks about how we're much more aware of ourselves and able to be aware of ourselves when we're in community.
Right.
Because
as long as it's
healthy community, right? Is that what you're going to say?
Right. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Because oftentimes we do have those blind spots or those things that we aren't aware of until someone makes us aware of that. And then we go, oh yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So Rod, you talked about being given a primary leadership role at a pretty young age. How do we raise up young leaders without throwing them into the deep end? Like, how do you know when they're ready? Or how do you, you've talked about some ways that you guys are working with emerging leaders to help them to be ready, but how do you do that without just throwing them in? I feel oftentimes, maybe you would feel the same way. I often feel that our leadership development was just that. Oh yeah, they'll be fine. Here's some authority. Here's something for you to lead and figure it out. And we'll be here to support you, but you'll be fine. And just throw us into the deep end.
Right.
How do you raise up young leaders so that they don't feel like they're being thrown into the deep end?
Well, you're right. We have not done a great job of it. Those with the gift of leadership, I think, have survived, or many have, right?
Right.
But boy, the casualties have been numerous for those who don't have the gift, but are called to or invited to lead in some capacity. I think when your question was about how do you raise them up without throwing them into the deep end, I think that we can learn some lessons from the Disney Corporation. Ed Catmull, in his book Creativity Inc., as in Incorporated.
Yeah,
I love the book. In my estimation, he's not my favorite verbal speaker. Sorry, Ed, if you're listening. but I love his book.
Okay.
And he outlines in there, Kim, that have you ever watched a Disney movie? Of course you've watched a Disney movie. You have kids.
Yep.
And at the beginning of a Disney movie are these things called shorts, right? Disney
Yep.
shorts. You get some lamp dancing around or some light or something, right? Or some beast that you can't quite identify, but it's rather entertaining.
Yeah.
The way that has come about is Disney, especially thanks to Ed Catmull's influence, when they are brainstorming around movies, they used to have a closed room. Now they have just a jam-packed room. They have a round table that is massive, and around the table are also chairs, like it's massive. Their learners participate in the conversations regarding the major movies. And they also take note of who is emerging and give them opportunity. Those shorts that we watch with Disney are actually the learners who have an opportunity to do what what everyone is talking about. And they're actually given a stage, right? That's why you go to a theater and you see these shorts come up. That's a learner on display, and that's an organization that is making heroes of emerging leaders. I love that. I'm oversimplifying the book because it's a great read, but the essence is there as well, I think, and lots of principles. We can invite younger leaders into the conversation. We can call out their giftings. We can make room for them to participate, and not just in a back room, but on the big screen.
Yep.
That's a very good analogy.
That's a great analogy. And all of us in our contexts, because I'm sure that there's not just pastors listening to this podcast. I'm sure that there's a wide variety of different people that are running nonprofit organizations, businesses, all sorts of different various environments of leadership. But all of us can take that idea of, okay, how do I create some, and in lots of leadership books that I've read, called them short, like small wins. How do I create small wins for these emerging leaders? How do I give them opportunity, stage, whatever, so that they can work it out in a safe environment, a safe way, with a bit of a net underneath them, but still get that real experience. It's a great...
Right, and still evaluate it afterwards, but it's evaluation by a person who also has their arm around them. It's hard to knock someone down when you have your arm around them, right?
Yeah.
You're caring for them all the way throughout.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of that is leaning into relationship with those emerging leaders.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember when Greg and I were significantly younger and going through a season of hardship, and you and Cheryl just came and took us out for supper. And that meant the world to us. Or even just caring that we showed up to like a regional gathering and saying, "Oh, welcome, you're home," and just welcoming us with open arms and being excited that we were there and that we were valuable. Those two small things as young leaders really helped us to feel like we weren't alone in the deep end.
Right.
It's, to swim out into the deep end or into the ocean alone is really scary. It's a heck of a lot less scary when there's someone swimming alongside you.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're all supposed to be leaders. We all have some level of leadership. And we know that the best leader, the person that we're supposed to lead like, is Jesus. So, how do we lead like Jesus? How do we, in this greater scope of this conversation about leadership and emerging leaders, what's one or two things that you would leave the listeners with about how do we lead like Jesus?
Of course, Kim, we both agree that it starts with listening to Ministry Minds, right?
Of course, right.
Yeah, but the next step, I think, that's obviously a massive subject, but a couple of things come to mind. The first is, I think we need to see people the way Jesus sees people.
Yeah.
We will always view people in one of three ways. We will see them as scenery, machinery, or people created in the image of God. Scenery people, I know there's been people walking by our sidewalk even while we've been chatting, but I'm aware they're going by, but I'm not really.
Right.
They're just part of the scenery. That's all.
Right.
Machinery people were often guilty of creating in churches where
Yes.
people are invited to simply to fill a task.
Yes.
We would need volunteers. I'm not really crazy about the term volunteers, but I think servants might
need
be
a
a
new
better
name.
idea. Yeah, we do.
I don't
But
know
we
that
can treat
servants
them.
is better.
I don't know. Whatever the case, sometimes we can fill ministry roles and use people as machinery.
Mhm.
And think that we're raising up leaders. No, raising up leaders is more than just having them do a task.
Yeah.
Seeing people created in the image of God is seeing people who are valuable simply for that fact. And
Yeah.
when we see them through those eyes, then we can also say, God, what is great about them? And there will always be something great about them.
Right.
And then having the making time and the courage, taking the courage to just have that conversation. I see this in you. I mean, Ferguson talks about that in Hero Maker big time.
Yeah.
And I would like to help develop that in you.
Right.
Which is what Jesus did, right? He's
Yeah, I
like,
was thinking back to the book that you and I were talking about, New Wave,
yeah,
and talking about how Jesus made disciples. Were they Christians right away? No, he invited them along to put down their nets and follow him.
right, for sure. So, I think leading like Jesus, we've got to see people the right way. We have to have a learning posture.
Mm-hmm.
I love the insights that you've shared and that you continue to share, Kim, in the podcast, because it's about learning from each other.
Yeah.
I think as soon as we lay down as soon as we refuse to walk in humility and learn, we also eliminate an opportunity to truly influence in the way God has called us to.
Yeah.
In many ways, leadership is about laying down our lives for the sake of others. Sounds like something Jesus is really good at.
Yeah. Sounds like something he did.
Yeah. And I love that he just walked with people. Hey,
Yeah.
so great. I still marvel at the incarnation. How on earth did God fit in an earth suit in the first place?
Yeah.
And then we serve a God with dirty feet, and he just walked with people and brought out the best in them and continued to encourage them and help pick them up even after they fell. I think leading like Jesus is not complicated, but it's got to start with being in great connection with Jesus, our Savior. Let's walk close to him. Let's let him develop us. Let's let him love people through us. Let's let him develop in us eyes that see potential in others and see beyond what they presently are and see what they can be.
Wow.
And then if we're willing to walk with them, he will use us to develop leaders. Not complicated. My wife Cheryl says it's so miraculous, it's natural. I like that.
That's good. I think that is, yeah, I love what you said there about it's not complicated. Jesus walked with people. That's what he did. And he invited people to walk with him. And I think that you're right. The first step in how we lead like Jesus is being in communion with Jesus. And he was humble to the point of death. And I think we need to be careful that we don't have false humility, or that we have such humility that we discount ourselves as leaders, but that we are, that we are humbly leading and following Christ first.
Right.
Good.
Right.
Good. Any resources on leadership that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Oh man, I've mentioned several already. I mean, I already mentioned Hero Maker and Creativity Inc. We've talked about Steve Pike's book. A couple of, you mentioned self-awareness being huge. A long-term mentor of mine, Paul Magnus, says that when asked what is the number one requirement to have a successful, thriving influence on people or ministry, says that self-awareness is the number one tool. Bradbury has great information about that. Bradbury and Greaves have done lots of work around EQ, emotional intelligence, which is crucial. I love anything that Buckingham puts out regarding self-awareness, and he doesn't call it emotional intelligence, but Marcus Buckingham, love his stuff. Good. It's just good practical tools to increase that level of self-awareness. So those are a few ideas. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're
Well, thank
welcome.
you so much for joining me. It's been a privilege. I always love having a chat with Rod.
It's great to be part of it. Thanks for inviting me, Kim.
Yeah. Well, have a great day and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Take care.